So let's start our session now. Um, Hello, everybody. My name is Mujana Scary. I'm the founder and CEO of Thousand Eyes on Me, which is a personal branding and talent development platform for women with an X, basically women and gender minorities. So our mission is to close the leadership gap. And today we have two amazing women on our panel with us who are, doing a great job in terms of leadership, executive leadership, business and career. And I would like to invite both of them to introduce themselves and their work. So, Deborah Crew, please welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's lovely to spend some time with you and Dana this afternoon. So I live in London, Ontario, Canada, which is near Toronto. Most people know where Toronto is. And I'm an executive coach, and I like to stay in the space of disrupting habits of thinking. So my background is in neuroscience. So I work with a lot of senior leaders, executive teams, and C-suites to help them lead with heart-centered leadership.
Amazing. Thank you. And you also have a podcast series.
I do. I have a podcast called Imperfect, the Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast. And we have 2 episodes every week, Wednesday and Friday. And I'm interviewing leaders from all over the globe. And we're almost a year old, if you can believe it.
That's amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much. And Donna Theis, right? Do I pronounce your family name correctly?
That's the European pronunciation. The American pronunciation is Dana Theis.
Yes, all right. I was trying to pronounce it in the French way, Theis.
Exactly. I was going to say, you're just right on for the European pronunciation. So thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here too. I'm Dana Theis with Empower Coaching, and I'm also an executive coach. I aspire to a podcast, but I don't have one. And my coaching practice is really for men and women around empowering ourselves. So as opposed to disrupting our habits of thinking, I'm all about reframing them to make them from dysfunctional to functional, but in ways that help us get into higher levels of leadership, because at the end of the day, it's all about us realizing our own highest potential through our work and through our careers. So I have a lot of resources on my site for women, because I tend to work mostly with women either in the executive suite or trying to get into the executive suite to really find their personal power to make it in what is still a man's world.
That's amazing. Just out of curiosity, to both of you, you've been coaching men and women, and I'm just curious to know. I mean, I don't want to be binary, like different people with different genders. What have been what you've noticed, how different women are compared to, let's say, men? You have to come and help.
Let me just say that there are absolutely differences, and I'm curious how Deb will respond to this. But the way I see it is that the same things are going on in all of us, right? Mm-hmm. The exact same emotional reality that we live in is the same, but the stories we tell ourselves about it are different, and the stories we tell each other about our, ourselves and our gender are different, and that creates different experience. So at the end of the day, we do have different experiences, and this would include on the spectrum, right? But a lot of it's not because we're different on the inside. It's because we have different experiences on the outside. People treat us different. They put us in boxes, and then we think we're in the box, but we want to get out of that box. Well, someone else is in another box. Their experience is different, but everybody is responding from themselves in very much the same way.
Yeah, amazing. I actually want to quote Amy Cuddy, basically who's a researcher at Harvard Business School, who says, the way we tell our story to ourselves matters. And that's exactly how we believe the stories that we tell ourselves, and that becomes, our truth. So I really like that, what you said also. What about you, Deb? What do you think?
Well, it's interesting, Dana, because I coach more men than women. I'm probably 80-20, which is so really, this will be an interesting conversation. I agree with what you said. I think it's an internal experience of self-awareness. I think that they have similar habits of thinking. I think they verbally express it in different ways. And I think that's what lends hand to the difference in their leadership, is how they interpret, how they process it, how they choose to turn around and unpack it or react. But it's interesting. I've talked to a lot of women, but I get hired on a regular basis by more men.
And I'm the exact opposite, probably 85-15 women.
It's funny. And there's not enough of us. So no. There really isn't. There is not enough coaches. If anybody takes anything away from this conversation, I think people think it's a saturated market. There's a lot of people, but especially now with the last year and what's happened with COVID and us being in the second wave, which I think has brought us to an even deeper level of, I'm going to say, situational episodes that are happening. I don't want to say behavior because it's not always. And I think people are just more aware of what's going on now. And there isn't enough coaches because we can only take so many clients on.
That's true.
Amazing. Yeah, that's amazing too.
So Moojan, did either one of us say what you expected us to say?
No. I didn't expect anything. Actually, I didn't even think about asking this question. I was just curious to know, and I didn't know that about Deb, that most of your clients are men.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they have more money. That's why, maybe. So I want to actually open up the conversation we have, which is about debunking myths and setting new, let's say, new stories, new standards for female leadership, by a video I saw today, which was an interview between Natalie Portman and Yuval Harari. I don't know how many of you know Yuval Harari. For sure you know Natalie Portman, but Yuval Harari is the author of a book called Sapiens, the brief history of human life. And then he also talks a lot about the behavior of the human being and how it has evolved, and where do we come from really, on our past, even, he has deep dive into the animals' lives and how their behavior is different. And so the conversation was about, is this about, for example, the physical power that men are more dominant in every society, almost throughout the history and in any industry? And the conversation was like, it was interesting. So Yuval Harari was saying that, well, it is not really about physics, because if you think about, let's say, Christianism, if you look at, Pope, for example, he's not the strongest person in the whole Christians. Like he's older. He's like, he wouldn't, beat a 20-year-old boy. But why he's doing that? They have this power actually to tell somebody else in their tribe, say, hey, do that, and that person will do that. Or he was talking about a certain group of chimpanzees that their females are more dominant. So even though the males are bigger and stronger, whatever the females won't do, actually that happens. So that was an interesting conversation. And then Natalie Portman says, well, the reality is that the men are, putting these pressure or sort of, putting these boundaries because they want to control women. And that's why we're having these sort of barriers in the way, because they sort of want to control this center of reproduction, because women are the center of reproduction and men are the tools to be used for this reproduction system. And so that was the whole conversation about it. And I'm really curious to know, what is your point of view of why do we have this leadership gap in all industries? Why does it happen? Is it because of the biology, or is it something else?
Do you want me to start?
Yes. Not a small question.
It's a big question, but I don't like using the word gap, because I think it gives us a vision of unused space. I think the biggest reason, I'm going to lean back on academia. I have interviewed over 200 leaders in the last year around the globe. And I can tell you that the continuity in comments is they are taught to lead with this armor on their chest. And in the coaching world, we refer to it as that wall of resistance. And if you look back in history, like you alluded, everything was kind of ruled with an iron fist. And I'm using that as a facetious example. So what if leaders drop the armor and start using connection and care in the same sentence as the word leadership? That was always shied upon. So through research and data analysis and C-suite leaders leaning in during COVID to really look at what's going on in the lens of the company, not just the KPIs and a profit and loss, but what's going on in my culture. And I think part of the aha moment, whether it's female or male in that C-suite role, is they finally had the ability to pause and exhale and realize the culture was either healthy or not healthy or significantly indifferent, but they chose to take the ownership because it's their behavior that drives the culture. And when you have a systematic approach to leadership and you want to rule with that iron fist, the new millennials coming in, they want nothing, they want no part of it. They no longer want managers. They want a leader at the helm who's going to share the vision and not have history repeat itself. So it's a really interesting vantage point as an executive coach to see, because the millennials are coming in now. They're at that age where they're taking on or being promoted to executive or C-suite leaders. And it's really neat for someone like me. I'm the year after the baby boomers. It's really neat to see the generational shift, but also your generation, Mujan, drawing the line in the sand, saying, we're not doing this anymore. So from my perspective, I think your generation has stepped forward progressively to change the lens of leadership. And I'm putting tools in their toolkit, in their arsenal, to execute with heart leadership and have those heart-centered qualities. Because vulnerability and empathy, find me a leader in the last year who hasn't had to exude such qualities.
So let me pick up on that for a second about this moment in time. And then I want to go back to the gap. I love what you said about a gap may not be the right way to think about it. But you're talking about this moment of time with, the COVID reality, and it has put a lot of people, into a reflective state. It's also, if you just look at the statistics, it's been terrible for women. I mean, not only the statistics of, single mothers who have to quit work and live in their sister's basement to take care of their kids, but, I have vice presidents and C-suite officer women who are quitting their job because their husband is the CEO of a company and there's no one to take care of the kids, and they have a 4-year-old. Mm-hmm. I mean, and so even though I agree with you that people are taking a step back, in this moment of time, women are bearing the brunt of this economy more than men are. Mm-hmm. So that is, and we're going to have to come back from that. I mean, we're individually losing, lifetime income from that. Mm-hmm. The workplace is losing a lot of good minds. The gender imbalance is going to grow. So, we're going to come back from this moment in a way that isn't a flowing move. We had just gotten to the point where women were getting employed as often as men in a lot of industries, and now we're set back. So that's the bad news. The good news, I think, when we go back to that gap, so it isn't a gap in the sense that there's no white space there. And here's how I like to think about it. If you look at the pipeline from entry level to CEO, entry level, women are roughly equal with men in terms of the number of people in the workforce. At the first level of promotion to first manager level, there's a huge drop, like 10%. And women never make up that that percentage. It just gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And we have to your point, why is that? So there's the gap, right? There's the numbers gap. It goes from 49, 51 to 38, whatever the rest is, and it just keeps going down from there. That's the gap that we're talking about. And if we look at it historically, I love Yuval Harari and I love Natalie's comeback, right? That's awesome. So if you look at it historically, culturally, men and women have had separate jobs through history, right? Mm-hmm. The men would go out and bring down the bison, and the women would do the hunting and gathering, and they were suited to that, and they had to breastfeed the babies, and who knows whatever the reasons are, but we've always had these kind of separate jobs through history. And now in the last 100 years, we haven't had to have separate jobs, and all of a sudden and certainly in the last 30 to 50 years, we've been put in the same workplace, and we're falling into cultural habits about how men lead, how women lead, et cetera, et cetera. And yet there's still, 30, 20, 10%. There are women succeeding at every level of leadership. Mm-hmm. So to me, the interesting part of the gap isn't why are we so small? It's that what are those women doing in those smaller percentages? So the pay gap, 80 cents on the dollar for white women, Black women, Hispanic women, Black men, also a pay gap, right? Mm-hmm. So what are the people who are making, more money than the white man? What are they doing right? What, for those women who aren't falling prey to these statistics, what are they doing right? That's the new model going forward, to pick up where Deb was going, right? Mm-hmm. Like we are changing the definition of leadership. Mm-hmm. So we're going to find the answer in looking at the women who are really succeeding and what they're doing right. And I would submit that what they tend to do right is not listen to the stories that tell them they should be in a smaller percentage. Mm-hmm. They make up their own stories that are empowering to them, that are functional, that help them deliver business results, that help them not fall prey to the imposter syndrome. The men have the imposter syndrome too, but they were brought up with stories on the playground that gave them an internal toolkit to not fall prey to the imposter syndrome the way that a little girl does. Mm-hmm. So that's the piece that's different, and getting inside the women and helping them find their personal strength. Mm-hmm. That's the solution. Mm-hmm. So I went all around in a really big circle.
Yeah, that's amazing. Let's go a little bit detail more about a few things that you mentioned that I would like to deeper, dive into that. For example, you've mentioned the myths, that there are around the female leadership. Can we go a little bit about what are these myths? For example, put some examples. What are the things that let's say the stereotype that we believe that female leadership is about, or women lead in certain ways that are different than men and they are not capable of X, Y, Z. Can we go a little bit more into details?
So wanting to talk more about challenges in the workplace for females. I loved how Dana framed that. There were so many good nuggets in that. It's the internal voices. It's like she said, and I always call it habits of thinking. If you don't think you're being treated equal, you're not going to be treated equal. If you don't want to put forth a higher standard than your male counterparts, you will consistently and persistently have whatever it may be, the gender stereotype. Women systematically through thinking put themselves in an uneven playing field, because that story that Dana talked about it's on repeat. So they have to start trusting in their own voice. They have to build alliances with other women, and they need to eliminate, not decrease, eliminate imposter syndrome, because Dana framed it beautifully. What are the 10% doing that are really rocking it and making the money or doing as good as the alpha white male? They have a limitless, deep-seated belief in themselves. They're empowered from the time they wake up in the morning. They're not caught up on doing everything perfectly because they know that's non-existent. So it's kind of like the habits of thinking where I love to play and coach every day. Women are so good at having a willingness to nurture. And when they turn that on themselves, they're powerful. That's the 10%. That's just a couple from my vantage point. I'll let Dana chime in here.
I love that. And I will say one thing. So you're right. They have a deep-seated confidence, right? But they still, I don't know if you really do eliminate the imposter syndrome. And I say that because my theory of the imposter syndrome is you eliminate it until you move up to the next level. And then now you're at a new level of leadership where you've not only have you never done it before, there are fewer people doing it. You have fewer mentors. The higher you go, the more people just expect you to figure it out. So guess what happens? The imposter syndrome keeps coming back and back and back. And so it's not about eliminating it. It's about understanding it and letting it be what it is. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, and I'm going to go forward anyway, because if I screw up, I'm going to fix it fast. So it's like being able to coexist with the imposter syndrome, which is what the men do. I know I have a client who's a CEO in a Manhattan ad agency that is growing at 400% a year. And do you know what he says to me every time we talk? Is he says, the imposter's back. You know, but you don't see it if you're not his coach, right? As opposed to women.
Comfort zone. So when you have a small comfort zone, you always feel like uncomfortable. And I would like to put it that way, like it's like our uncomfort zone. Because when we say like an imposter syndrome, it looks like a disease. It's like incapable of doing something. But like when we put it this way, that okay, I have never done that, and I'm uncomfortable with it. This is my, uncomfort zone. And by doing it, as Deb mentioned, I'm getting comfortable with it. So it looks like I'm eliminating it at that level, but then it goes back when we go higher and our comfort zone, expands. So.
Well, and to that point, I love that analogy because I'm always telling my clients, you've got to make discomfort in your comfort zone. You have to become comfortable with discomfort because guess what? The men, that's what they're taught on the playground. They fall down and they're taught to get back up. They're like, you're uncomfortable. You skinned your knee. Get back up there. And the little girls are told, oh, come over here. Don't get so far away from me. And even though there's lots of examples where that's not the case, there are patterns in our culture for how little boys and little girls are acculturated to discomfort and to risk and to all kinds of things. And to your point, we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And there are strategies for doing that, which we won't go into here. But to me, one of the other myths that I think we should talk about here is the myth of the leader as the strong and vulnerable type, which is like, I call it, that's the king model, the king archetype. The leader is always in charge and always confident and always knows the right thing to do. And a lot of women, that's not authentic to them. That's just, it's not authentic to them. And it's called the double bind because everybody wants the leader to be confident and assertive. And the woman is like, but I'm not confident. I'm not like that. And so she feels like she can't win because then she goes and gets aggressive and people say you're too aggressive because you're supposed to be pretty and cute. Right. And so now how does the woman win? Well, the way she wins is she says, you know what, there's an authentic way for me to be a strong and confident leader, and I'm going to find it. And then she finds the middle way, and she goes out from between the extremes. And so this myth that there's only one way to be a leader, there's actually research that shows that the people, men and women, who have flexible leadership styles that can be situationally responsive to what's actually happening, they're the ones that win. It's not always strong and confident. Sometimes it's empathetic and listening. But knowing when to be which is the secret.
Actually, I really like, what the Prime Minister of New Zealand also mentions always, that she had been, she's actually I think she was the youngest Prime Minister in the whole world, I believe, when she was elected at, I think around 30s or even 29. She's now 32. And she says that people kept criticizing her that you're not, a very, strong, you're not, like, like how men used to lead. And she said, for me, I'm a compassionate leader and I'm proud of it. So there's no need to change it and to change myself into, the role that people think I should be.
Huh. And she does a great job.
She does. And, she's debunking the myth that kindness is not a weakness, it's a strength. And that's what I love about her.
Yes. Agreed. And actually, to that point, let's use her as an example. She's not falling prey to the story herself that by being kind, she's not being a good leader. Mm-hmm. She's turning that story into, by being kind in this, I am being a good leader. Absolutely. And what happens? She looks like a great leader. And she's redefining leadership in front of our eyes.
Mm-hmm. That's true. So if you want to say, for example, all right, we know a little bit like the myths, but what are the counter stories, like the stories that we as women or even men should tell ourselves to create these, new standards? What are the counter stories that we should think of?
I think it's important that, just to tag on to what Dana said, you have to stay present in your thinking. Sometimes you need to pause because you don't know what leadership quality you need to put on. And I think COVID has helped us navigate that as coaches. And you're a great example of your client in New York. The word pivot was used so much last year. It was almost ad nauseum every time I heard it. But the truth is, it's where leaders were going. They weren't just leading. They were managing, they were pivoting, they were reacting because their vision, they're at the helm, keeping that ship pointed at the North Star for the whole company. But the company shifted and it's at home now. So for them to have their primary residence of just living in the moment, I think fostered a renewal of their leadership for slowing things down, revisiting things. Maybe there wasn't as timely a crunch on some of the decisions. But again, what Dana alluded to, people think because they're at the helm and they're the leader that they know everything. Intuition management is a big piece of leadership. It doesn't matter how many initials are after their name. Their goal is to share their vision 7 to 10 years out, make sure everyone knows what it is. And what have they done? They have surrounded themselves with individuals who are smarter than them in all the areas that they need to lead. So it's not a neuroscience, we don't need to be neurosurgeons to figure this out. I think they've been given a clean slate with COVID to breathe and exhale and just allow some more time for common sense to come in, because there's been more conversations and not all around business acumen. And that's the beautiful thing that I've witnessed with management teams and executive teams. Instead of saying, "Oh, hey, Dana, how you doing?" And Dana going, "Oh, I'm good." Me taking the time to say, "Hey, before we hit record, how are you really feeling?" Because I'm tired today and there's been no sun here, and just being a real person, I can't even tell you how that's opened up dialogue and conversations with C-suites to their teams. Because it's kind of like, they were like, "Who is this person? He or she never does this." We're pivoting.
Yeah, absolutely.
The question was on strategies and stories, and I'm struggling to come up with one or two that I think are the pithy ones because I have so many. But I would say that the main one that I'd like to encourage people to think about is moving from either or to both and. Mm-hmm. Because what happens, so many people get in a story that tells them I could be this or I could be this. And then they get stuck in the story where there's a limited number of options. And as soon as you say, how can I be this and this? Now there's a third option, if not more. right? And so when women, and this is true for men too, but women get into a story of thinking, I've either got to be aggressive or nice. Okay, now as soon as you're in an either or, neither one of them is the right solution, right? Mm-hmm. So as soon as you're in an either or, you got to move into a both and. That's one little trick there. But the other is that going back to your idea of comfort zone, find something that makes you uncomfortable that you want to overcome. Put that in your stretch zone, and don't put anything else in your stretch zone until you've mastered that. When you've mastered that, move the next thing. And guess what's happening? Your comfort zone is expanding one discomfort at a time. And pretty soon you've rewritten so many stories. And as women, we tend to overwhelm ourselves. I've got to be perfect now. I have to fix these 15 things. One thing at a time. My to-do list is so long. What's the one thing I'm going to do right now that's going to make me effective? And we can get down into like just one thing at a time in our discomfort zone that we're moving into our comfort zone. In a year, everybody's moved forward.
I think that's one of the challenges that most women might face, like because they do a lot of, multitasking, home tasks and then work tasks together. I don't want to again talk about like work-life balance because we talk about it all the time for women, and we never ask that question for men. And I was actually watching this comedy show that was saying that, so nobody asked this question to men. How do you manage work-life balance? The answer is they don't. So that's why we don't ask it from them. But what I want to say is that, like, I find it myself sometimes very difficult to actually stop multitasking and really focusing on one thing. How do you do that? How would you, help people who have the same issue?
Am I going first? You go first. Your turn.
Okay. So yeah, I have actually an answer to this, which is give yourself permission to do one thing now, and then give yourself permission to do something else in a minute or in 10 minutes or later. Because the have to do it all now comes from so many places. We have so many options to think we've got too much to do. Like there's so many reasons to have too much to do. And to actually give ourselves space to focus on one thing, you have to give yourself permission to not ignore the rest of the stuff in the future. So you give yourself permission to focus on one thing, and you give yourself permission to come back to something in the future. And you can create these little bubbles of focus. And then once in a while I say, just go look at cat pictures on Facebook. Like give yourself time to decompress, walk the dog, and follow your Instagram addiction, whatever it is. Like give yourself unstructured time, because that's the time where your brain is kind of reorganizing and reintegrating. And other than that, be just super disciplined with your attention until you can't, and then go look at cat videos on Instagram.
Yeah, what you said is actually interesting. I just want to add something to it. So I don't know if you know the book, The Chimp's Paradox, the Paradoxe de Chimpanzé. I read it in French. And it's basically the guy, I forgot his name, but he talks about how procrastination, just going and watching some, cat pictures on our Instagram, it lets us to keep the previous, thought, the main thing that we wanted to work on, and getting elaborated, like it being, and on the background of our mind to be contracted slowly, or we think about it. And when we come back to the task, we can resolve the problem or find the solution faster than if we would just sit on our chair, focusing, pushing ourselves, like after 2-3 hours, we're exhausted. We don't have the energy and focus anymore. That is something like I realize. It's super, super interesting, and it gives us some air to, clear our head and come back to the task.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you have to give yourself permission to really go do it and check out. Go ahead, Deb.
I hate the words work-life balance. I love to throw them in the trash and take them to the curb. I think 5 years ago, I recoined that to work-life integration. I think if you seek to have that permission and the allowance of aligned heart and mind, it's okay to not be okay. And if you schedule more than 3 things a day, you're setting yourself up for failure, especially at the leadership level. The average amount of thought from the time you get up in the morning to the time you go to bed at their level is 35,000 decisions. That's consciously and subconsciously. So they're like a cognitive concierge. Stuff's coming in, they're delegating, they're thinking, they're doing. Sometimes there's not even time to think, but they don't set their day up to be at a level where it's going to take a U-turn and go sideways. So again, it's coming back to what Dana said. The permission has to also have intention. So when you have intention for the day, it's going to unfold. So if something does go off the rails or you don't get something done, you're not going to emotionally beat yourself up, because you just need to stay in the space and time that you're at and work with what you have. And in COVID right now, moving something to tomorrow, that's okay. And when we're on the other side of COVID, it's still going to be okay. So that's kind of another blessing that COVID has given us, is we are working from home. And what we don't get done isn't detrimental, because we're not traveling. We're not doing what we used to do. And it hasn't been a couple of weeks. It's been a year. So we're already in this new groove, working from home. And I always say to anybody who has more than 3 things, it's like that to-do list that Dana talked about. You're setting yourself up for perfectionism, which is never going to be a tangible reality. So great tips. And just being able to stay, thinking and cognitively in the space you're in. It's like us having this conversation right now. None of us are thinking, what are we having for dinner, right?
Now I am.
Well, I don't have anything yet, yo.
So can I pick up on that, on 2 things?
Absolutely.
Actually?
Sure.
So one is, you use my magic word, which is intention. And whenever you're stressed out for any reason, if you stop and you go, well, okay, what does success right now look like? Mm-hmm. For this call, we want to impart some wisdom. We each have some things we want to share, so that's what success looks like right now, not thinking of that, the dinner recipe. And so anytime you ask yourself what success looks like, and then actually say, yeah, figure it out, as opposed to, I don't know, I have to get it all done. Wrong answer. That's not success. Anytime you say, oh, I need to get this presentation done so I can go figure out what's for dinner. Great. Now I can focus. So like being able to have an intention and focus on it and know that that's what will move you forward. That's like a magic pill you can take if you just keep asking yourself that question. Mm-hmm. But I want to come back to the work-life thing, because my word for it is work-life blend, just like your integration. But I've just been redefining it as work-life equity. Because when we think about work-life balance, I don't know what that ever did mean, but the problem systemically at work and at home is that at work and at home, women do more of the busy work. It's not equitable in terms of the work that women take on versus men. So if you have work-life equity in your home, you have a shot at work-life balance with your work. But if you don't have work-life equity at home, you lose. And so that's why we're seeing a lot more very senior women, like at the CEO level. Unfortunately, women divorce more often if they're going to be in the CEO level, because finding that kind of balance at home isn't as easy. On the other hand, there's a lot of women in very senior positions whose husbands quit work, or whose husbands move back and like take care of more of the home things. I have a friend of mine who used to be a neighbor. She's now very high at the Fed. And her husband told me, I took a step back in my career because, she's on this rocket ship and I want to be with my kids more. And he goes, and guys at work give me shit for that. Like, oops, sorry, was I not supposed to say that? They give me a hard time for that, and that's just not right. And that's the kind of equity that needs to be more normal, where a man and a woman who are in a relationship, or 2 people in a relationship, forget the gender, they say, wait a minute, how are we going to make this work given what we want to do in our careers and given the life we want to have in our home? And when that's a meaningful, what's the word I'm looking for? A meaningful and healthy conversation, they find equity, and both of them can then find more equality and equity in the workplace. And so by not addressing it at home, we're making it impossible for women at work.
Yeah, I totally actually agree with you. And I also saw some of my friends, especially in Asia, I saw that many men actually quitting their job and taking care of children at home. And then the woman was, working out. That was surprising to see that. And it takes some courage to do that, and it takes a high level of understanding that it's okay to do that. So,
I think it's neat. Can I throw in a point, Mujan? I think it's generational, because I was born in the 60s and we were brought up to go to school, graduate, go to university, get the job, stay in the job, become a mom, maybe quit the job or maybe work part-time, but stay in that job because you need your pension. So it was kind of like Dana alluded earlier in the conversation. Okay, you have to pass, but figure it out. You can have the career, but you have to be the soccer mom too, and just figure it out. So it's, not to sound funny, but like we need help making the baby, but we're going to carry the baby, manage the business, manage the house. Like we really have it all on our shoulders. So that equity that Dana talked about, I am seeing it, but unfortunately I see it more in the divorce rate than I do in, okay, how are we going to work this out? Because the husband's a similar age or within 3 to 5 years, he's on the same trajectory, but he's not sharing the equity. And if the equity is shared at home, and I'm living proof of this, I've been married for 30 years to the same guy. We both own businesses and we gave room for negotiation with the equity, depending on the kids' ages. Mm-hmm. And that's what works. So we could be the best executive coaches in the world, Dana, but at the end of the day, it comes down to meaningful conversation. And when you can have meaningful conversation about really hard things, I think that is the icing on the cake for dispute resolution, whether we're coaching businesses or negotiating with our husbands. And it's such a common sense thing, but unfortunately, it's not existent. And I think COVID has exacerbated that.
Yeah, I like to talk about what you just mentioned, that common sense is not common practice.
It's not. It's one of my favorite sayings.
I know. What would be your message, or one single statement to maybe men who are watching us today about sharing exactly what we're talking about, to convince them to maybe, take it as an option to quit their job if their wife is gaining more and taking care of the children instead.
I have an interesting client right now who, it's an Irish company actually. And I have a couple that is that power couple, and they have twins and they're 4. And it comes up a lot in our coaching, but it also comes up in her coaching because I have the husband and another coach has the wife, because we ask permission for us to chat and not negate or breach any confidential conversations, but we as coaches wanted to align to be the best for this couple individually, but also strategically. And it was just getting them to pause and take time for them, because what happened, they got married, they had difficulty having a baby, then they got pregnant, they got 2 babies instead of 1, and both of their careers they both exponentially got busier. And it was the fruits of their labor for many years before. When we carved time back into their life for them, and taking them back to where they started as a couple, that was kind of the sweet spot, because they got so busy being busy with work and children and parenting that they forgot the relationship that afforded them all the success that they had gained. And they probably would have got divorced. But we got really strategic together, and we brought them back to that point to carve out time for them. And it was really emotional and really beautiful. But it's like Dana said, they both showed up having equity in the game. And they made a pact to agree to disagree, but never go into emotional overdraft again, and communicate as well as home as you do in the job. Because I think people can succumb to leadership, and I think it's exciting, and I think they get caught up with the brand and the title and everything that goes. But if you come home to an empty house, who are you sharing your success with? So it all comes back to reassessing and looking at what your definition of success is. And I think that's another element that we've gained in the leadership and coaching world with COVID, is people having time to kind of reassess and turn the lens on themselves to say, is this really where I wanted to be at this age and doing this in my life? And they're doing really great now. But sometimes, and I know Dana will probably allude to this, you need external eyes looking in. Because sometimes you don't see what you don't see when you just go through the mundane parts of each day, and someone kind of calling you on it and going, wait a minute. So that's a recent one that I've been working on, and I'm really thrilled about, because it's easy to forget what you don't see.
Thank you. I actually wanted to say that we have just 9 minutes left. I don't want to close this conversation without tackling the pay gap and equity pay. So I wanted to address this question to you, maybe Dana. What are your thoughts, and what would you give as a tip to a woman today, a young woman who wants to, sort of negotiate for the salary? And I'm sure many women now, since they have laid off, they are trying to find another job, and negotiation can be a little bit hard, because maybe they are trying to find just a job to be able to keep up, with their life, and it will be even in a harder position to negotiate. So what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, you gave me the easy one. So the first thing here's how I really think of it, which is the pay gap is a statistical fact based on a bazillion people, and it's really not between men and women, like we just said. It literally goes down the ladder of privilege, right? White men, white women, Black men. I have it on my website somewhere, the exact numbers, right? And so the pay gap as a social and cultural phenomenon and an economic phenomenon is not your problem as an individual, right? Like that's not, you're not here to fix the pay gap for all other women or people of color. Like that's not your job. Your job is to get compensation. So it's not always pay, a package of compensation that makes you feel valued and supports your life and career. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at it that way, you have to stop and think, well, what's important to me? What is my definition of success? And the real trick is, I'm going to use Deb's words here, that little voice in your head that goes, psst, you won't get the job if you ask for too much. Psst, you're not really worth that. Psst, you didn't prove that you were worth, like whatever that little voice is, that little voice has got to go take a bath. Like that is not going to help you. It's not going to help you. The voice you need in your head is, what if? Mm-hmm. What if I asked for that? And what if they didn't give it to me? Okay, where's my bottom line? At what point do I not feel valued? At what point am I not taken care of? And if you know that going in and you know what your range is, this is basic negotiation strategy, right? Know your walkaway point. Mm-hmm. You may discover a new walkaway point. They may say, well, we can't give you what you want, but here's what we can give you. We really want you. And you may decide to do it, but do it out of choice. So it's an empowering choice. But the point is, don't let the little voice talk you down. Because the person on the other end, the person, your employer, it's in their financial interest to get you to talk yourself down, right? And no one is looking out after your needs except you in that moment. So you got to stand up for them, and you got to stand up for what you think is fair. And then you need to ask for more and be willing to negotiate to less. And I can't tell you how many of my clients have come and saying, well, I think I deserve $10,000 more, but I'm going to ask for 5. And I say, ask for 10. And they come back and they go, I got 10, and you have to go for it. And that's how we as individuals change the pay gap. Mm-hmm. Socially, we need pay transparency. We need better accountability and tracking, but that's not our responsibility as individual women.
Mm-hmm. So much. I was at the same time putting your links in the chat. So we have 5 minutes left. If the audience has any questions, please share your questions in the chat. Otherwise, I wanted to ask you, both of you, if you have just any last, tips or any message to women out there, knowing that this actually conference was organized in collaboration with so many female nonprofits and for-profit organizations around the world. We have women from Africa, from India, from Middle East. Even we had a panel yesterday from Iran, my country, on blockchain. So we have a lot of diverse, women from around the world. So it was really a place to get everybody together. What would be your message? Like, bottom line, what would be my, as a woman, as a person who's today facing a lot of issues because of my gender or because of my, where I'm born, that adds to actually my problems of my gender in some cases. What is your message to me? How can I think? How can I understand actually I can define my success in life? What could you give me to help me to understand? How can I define better what is success for me? It's a tough question, sorry.
I'm going to let Deb go first on that one.
I'm going to anchor your thoughts and your vision back to the title. Choose yourself. Choose to amplify your voice, and know that I'm a yoga teacher. So you're going to get some yoga here. Yoga is science of the mind. It's not laying on your yoga mat and doing downward dogs. When you master your thoughts and get really silent, you become successful when you start listening to yourself. And when you listen to yourself and know thyself, that's when you step into your greatness. So the nugget that I want to leave you with is the hashtag for International Women's Day for 2021. Choose to challenge. Choose to challenge yourself. Don't accept the status quo. Because when you do that, you're not amplifying your voice. And we live in such a volatile, unprecedented world right now. And what's the worst thing that can happen if you don't get the outcome? You fall forward, you get back up, and you try again. Because not trying is harder to live with than failing, laughing, falling down, and getting back up. So I'm going to leave the viewers with, I challenge all of you to choose to challenge yourself and amplify your voice. We're here for one life and one trip around the sun, and it's not a dress rehearsal. So why not you?
So much, Deb. Beautiful. Thank you. Dana.
So I'm going to give the same advice, but through a slightly different set of words. So I used to interview startup founders and CEOs of small companies who were still in business on the radio. And I was always asking them, how did you get to be where you are? How did you overcome your challenges? This is men and women alike. And I only heard one theme that was consistent across all of them. And that was that they never gave up. They never gave up. They always assumed if I'm looking at a block, that's either a block I have to learn to knock down, or if I just go over to the other side, I could go around it. And they did it over and over and over again. And to your point, Deb, you don't ever give up. You always look for that next way forward and ask to see what you're not seeing, challenge whatever is making you afraid. You just don't give up. And get yourself some really good girlfriends who enable you and don't disable you. They don't live in your wounds. They don't feed your wounds. They challenge you to amplify your voice. And if you have those two things, you don't give up, and you have people who will support you and push you along at the same time, support your effort to challenge yourself, you can't fail.
I loved it. I love both of what you mentioned. I've heard this a lot also from Deb, failing forward, and that had become actually something I'm really trying to practice it in my life. And also what you mentioned surrounding ourselves with people who are supporting us. It is a tremendous change in life. Sometimes we stay in situations that we try to maybe fight with something that we cannot control or we cannot change, and we have to just surrender, and that's it, and slowly take ourselves out of that situation to in place an environment that we have that support system, and we have the freedom to move from our comfort zone out and be able to fulfill our potential. So I would like to end our session with this quote from one of our guests on our podcast, Thousand Voices, Abby, who says that you never fail a dream unless you quit it. So thank you so much, both of you, Deb, Dana, for amazing insights you shared with us, with our audience. If there's any link you want to add to your website that I shared here, maybe you want to share where people can find you, how to reach out to you, please don't hesitate to write it in the chat. And I would also give the audience a few minutes if they have any questions to ask you, and then we can close this session.
You're welcome, Alice.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Amazing. So I advise everybody to check out the website, the links. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. Also, 1,000 Eyes on Me. We're going to have new courses on our academy where we are trying to help women and gender minorities to become better leaders, unleash their full potential. And yeah, stay tuned. See you soon. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Deb.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Bye.
I'm gonna have something. I'm gonna find something for dinner, by the way.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.